the cold wind bit at Elias's old cloak. It felt like icy breath, carrying whispers from the old, twisted trees on the hills. Elias, a humble writer who mostly just worked with old papers in quiet rooms, gently nudged his tired pony, Bartholomew, up the last muddy path. The pony's hooves made soft squelching sounds, and its breath came out in frosty puffs that quickly disappeared into the growing darkness. Elias's fingers were numb, even with his worn gloves. He pulled his hood tighter and looked at the dark shape now on the horizon, Blackwood Keep. People said this castle was as old as the rocks it was built from. Its tall, strong towers poked into the bruised, purple sky, like the sharp teeth of a forgotten monster. Even from far away, Elias felt a strong sense of worry, a cold fear that wasn't just about the winter air. Lord Reginald, a noble he rarely saw, had sent him to copy some old land papers. This job had seemed easy back in the warm, busy manor house. But the journey itself had felt strange. A raven had followed him for miles, squawking sadly from bare tree branches. A sudden, strange chill had gone through a sunny clearing. And the last innkeeper he spoke to had whispered fearfully when Elias mentioned Blackwood Keep. The innkeeper quickly made the sign of the cross and mumbled something about the shadows that stick to its walls, before changing the subject. The sun had already set behind the hills, leaving a faint orange glow that mixed with the dark blue sky. Only a thin sliver of the new moon gave a little light, making long, dancing shadows from every rock and small bush. This turned the familiar land into something strange and scary. Elias found himself holding the small, old silver cross around his neck. It felt comforting against the growing worry in his chest. As they got closer, Blackwood Keep looked even bigger and scarier. Its dark gray stones seemed to soak up the last bit of light, making it look less like a building and more like a natural part of the mountain itself, dark and stubborn. Elias strained his eyes, looking for any sign of life, any welcoming light from a torch or a warm fire. But the many windows in the huge walls were all dark, like empty eye sockets staring at a lonely world. This made the whole castle feel empty and like a tomb, which made Elias even more nervous. He had expected guards, someone for the horses, or a castle manager to meet him. But the huge, iron-covered wooden gates were closed and silent. Their old surface was scarred from hundreds of years of wind and rain. Heavy chains and bolts made them look even more forbidding, as if they were locked against some unseen, constant danger. A shiver went down his spine, not from the cold, but from something much deeper. Elias got off his pony, his boots sinking a little into the soft ground. The silence around him was so deep he could hear his own heartbeat, a fast drum against the huge, heavy quiet of the place. Even Bartholomew, usually so calm, made a low, worried sound and pawed the ground with one hoof, his ears twitching as if he sensed something Elias couldn't yet. Taking a deep breath, Elias reached for the heavy iron knocker, shaped like a snarling animal's head. His hand shook a little as his knuckles touched the cold metal. The sound of the knock echoed strangely, bouncing through the still air. It didn't fade away as it should, but seemed to hang there, then slowly disappear into the empty space. This left an even deeper silence than before, a silence that felt heavy with unanswered questions. He waited, counting slowly to 50, then 100. His eyes darted from one shadow to another, half expecting a ghost-like guard to appear from the darkness. But nothing moved. Only the wind sighed softly through the old stones, a sad, almost human sound that made the hairs on his neck stand up. Doubt started to creep into his mind, cold and sneaky. He wondered if he had come to the wrong place, even though the castle's clear shape, with its main tall tower and two smaller side towers, perfectly matched the rough drawing Lord Reginald had given him. Just as he was about to knock again, he heard a faint, tiny scratching sound, seeming to come from inside the solid wooden gate itself. It sounded like rats scurrying behind a wall, or maybe dry branches scraping against stone. He leaned closer, frowning, trying to figure out where the sound came from. His heart beat faster, a dull throb in his temples. Then, with a sudden, loud clang that made him jump back in surprise, a small, square peephole in the gate slid open from the inside. It showed a single, watery eye that blinked slowly, watching him with a strange, unsettling focus that sent another jolt of unease through Elias. The eye was old, set deep in a network of wrinkles. It looked strangely empty, but also very sharp, like a hawk's eye. It stared at him for what felt like forever, studying him, judging him. Then a low, rough voice, hoarse from age and not being used much, spoke from behind the gate. The words were muffled but clear enough to understand. "Who wants to come into Blackwood Keep at this unholy hour?" Elias, still a little out of breath from the peephole opening so suddenly, cleared his throat, trying to calm himself. He replied, "I am Elias, a scribe. Lord Reginald sent me to Lady Eleanor Blackwood to copy some papers. I was expected." The eye stayed fixed on him for another long moment, its gaze steady, before the peephole slid shut with the same sudden clang. This pushed the gate back into its scary silence. Elias was left standing there, once again in the deep, unsettling quiet, wondering if he had been told to leave, or if his words had even been heard. A nagging uncertainty grew in his stomach. After what felt like a very long time, but was probably just a minute or two, the heavy chains behind the gate rattled with a deep, loud clang that echoed through the whole courtyard. Then came the groan of old bolts being pulled back, a slow, difficult protest of metal against wood. And then, with a deep, shaky creak, one side of the huge gate slowly, grandly swung open. It showed a narrow, dark opening, just wide enough for a man and his pony to pass through. Standing in the darkness inside was a figure so bent and thin that Elias first thought it was an old tree stump. But then it shuffled forward, showing itself to be an old man, impossibly skinny, his face a map of deep wrinkles. A few strands of white hair clung to his balding head. This must be the voice from before, Elias thought, noticing the same strangely empty, yet sharp, eyes that had looked through the peephole. These eyes seemed to have seen countless seasons pass inside these strong walls, holding a deep sadness and knowledge that made Elias very uncomfortable. The old man held up a flickering, spluttering lantern. Its weak yellow light cast long, dancing shadows that twisted and moved across the cobbled courtyard, making everything seem to shift as if it were alive. The air inside the castle walls was even colder than outside, filled with a damp, earthy smell, thick with the scent of old stone, rotting leaves, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, that Elias couldn't quite place. This scent sent a fresh wave of unease over him. "Follow," the old man croaked, his voice barely a whisper. He turned without waiting for an answer. Elias, feeling a strange mix of relief and growing fear, carefully led Bartholomew through the narrow opening. The huge gate groaned shut behind them with a loud thud that seemed to cut them off from the outside world completely. They were left surrounded by the echoing darkness of the courtyard, where the silence was broken only by Bartholomew's soft hoof beats and the rustle of the old man's torn cloak as he shuffled deeper into the shadows. His lantern was a tiny, bobbing light swallowed by the vast, imposing darkness of Blackwood Keep. Elias felt an undeniable, chilling feeling that he had just crossed a line, not just into a castle, but into a completely different world. A place where time moved differently and secrets were buried deep within the cold, hard stone. A place from which getting out might be much harder than getting in. The courtyard was huge, bigger than he had imagined. It was surrounded by high, plain walls that loomed like dark cliffs on all sides. Their surfaces were slippery with moss and dark stains that hinted at hundreds of years of neglect and forgotten stories. In the faint light of the old man's lantern, Elias could just barely see the outlines of several overgrown bushes and what looked like an old and used well. Its stone edge was cracked and broken, and its depths were hidden by shadows that seemed to swallow the light. A single, bare, twisted tree stood like a silent guard in the center, its stark shape outlined against the barely visible sliver of moon. The air inside the courtyard, even though it was protected from the direct wind, felt even colder. It was a deep, chilling cold that seemed to come from the stones themselves, seeping into Elias's bones. He instinctively pulled his cloak even tighter, his breath making thick, white clouds in front of his face. The old man, who hadn't introduced himself, and Elias hadn't thought to ask in his confused state, kept shuffling forward. His pace was surprisingly steady for someone so old. He led them towards a smaller, arched doorway at the bottom of the main castle. This doorway looked less like an entrance, and more like a wound in the ancient stone, its dark opening promising only deeper shadows and unknown rooms. As they got closer, a faint, almost unnoticeable smell. The old man finally stopped in front of the arched doorway. He held his lantern a little higher, its light showing a heavy, iron-studded door that looked almost as old as the castle itself. Its dark wood was scarred and weathered. Without a word, he pushed it open, revealing a long, narrow hallway. Its stone walls were slick with dampness, leading into complete darkness. Elias hesitated at the entrance, a deep unwillingness fighting with his sense of duty and the pure tiredness from his journey. The hallway was completely silent, a heavy, suffocating quiet that seemed to press in on him from all sides. The faint, unsettling smell of metallic earth grew stronger here, a scent that tickled the back of his nose, making his throat feel tight and dry. He could almost taste the dust and dampness in the air, a taste that was strangely bitter, almost metallic itself. The old man just grunted, a low, guttural sound, and shuffled into the darkness. His lantern's weak glow quickly shrank, threatening to disappear completely, pulling Elias into the looming emptiness. With a final, desperate gulp of the outside air, Elias led Bartholomew forward. The pony's hesitant steps echoed strangely in the narrow space, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the heavy silence that seemed to absorb all noise. The hallway twisted and turned, each bend leading to more of the same, endless stone, endless shadows. Elias felt a growing sense of being lost, a terrifying feeling of being stuck in a maze with no way out. He strained his eyes, trying to see beyond the weak light of the lantern, but the darkness was absolute, a solid, impenetrable wall that seemed to press in on him. It filled his mind with unsettling thoughts of things that might lurk just out of the light's reach, things that preferred the deep, unyielding gloom. His imagination, usually great at making detailed stories from simple facts, now tormented him, creating scary shapes and whispering voices from every flicker of shadow. He squeezed his eyes shut for a brief moment, then opened them, forcing himself to focus on the old man's shuffling figure, the only real link to reality in this increasingly dreamlike journey. Finally, after what felt like forever but was probably only a few minutes of going through the twisting passages, the hallway widened a little. It opened into a larger, huge space, dimly lit by a single, oil lamp hanging weakly from a chain overhead, stained with soot. Its light was barely strong enough to push back the creeping shadows. This space seemed to be a basic stable. Its stone floor was covered in a thick layer of old straw and smelled strongly of horse manure. Elias breathed a small sigh of relief. The familiar smells of a stable were a welcome comfort in the unsettling strangeness of the castle. There were only 2 empty stalls, their wooden bars cracked and split with age, suggesting that the keep had very few horses, or perhaps none at all, except for his own. The old man simply pointed towards one of the stalls with a bony hand, his movements slow and careful, before shuffling over to a small, wooden bucket, from which he scooped out a small handful of oats into a feed trough. "He can rest here," the old man rasped, his voice barely audible above the rustle of straw as Bartholomew, clearly happy to be out of the cold and the heavy silence of the hallways, eagerly began to eat the meager food. Elias quickly took off his pony's saddle and bridle, and gave Bartholomew a comforting pat on his neck, his fingers resting on the rough mane, finding comfort in the simple, familiar action. As he turned back to face the old man, who was now watching him with that unsettling, empty stare, a chilling thought hit him. He hadn't seen any other animals. No dogs, no cats, not even the common mice that usually filled such old buildings. This made the entire castle even more deeply and unsettlingly silent, as if life itself had slowly, carefully been taken from its very stones. The old man, who Elias now vaguely remembered being called Master Alaric by Lord Reginald's manager, though the name felt far away and unimportant in the heavy atmosphere of the castle, then called him forward with another slow, deliberate wave of his bony hand. He led Elias out of the stable and into another winding passage. This one was a little wider and less heavy, though still dimly lit by occasional, flickering wall lights. Their weak flames barely pushed back the growing darkness. The air here felt different, subtly warmer, with a faint, lingering smell of wood smoke and old paper. This smell was much more comforting than the metallic tang of the lower hallways, yet it still failed to completely get rid of the constant feeling of worry that clung to Elias like a second skin. They walked up a wide, worn stone staircase, its steps hollowed out by hundreds of years of countless footsteps. It spiraled upwards into the heart of the castle. With each upward turn, Elias felt a tiny bit of hope come back. Hope that perhaps the upper rooms would be less scary, less filled with the unsettling silence that had been everywhere on the lower levels. But as they reached the landing, opening into a long, echoing hallway, his hopes quickly disappeared. The hallway was vast and dark, lined with heavy, tapestried doors that looked more like forgotten tombs than entrances to living rooms. Their rich, faded fabrics showed scenes of long-dead lords and ladies, their faces drawn with a grim, almost sad intensity that seemed to follow him with their painted eyes. No warmth came from any of these closed doors, no sounds of happiness or even quiet talks. Only the same deep, suffocating silence that had been with him since he arrived at Blackwood Keep. Master Alaric shuffled along the hallway, his footsteps barely audible on the cold stone floor. His lantern cast long, distorted shadows that danced like restless ghosts on the old tapestries. Elias found himself instinctively walking faster, a desperate urge to stay close to the old man, to hold on to the faint light of his lantern, the only source of warmth and comfort in the vast, echoing darkness, the only thing that seemed to keep the approaching shadows away. Finally, they stopped in front of one of the doors, less grand than the others. Its tapestry showed a faded, unclear hunting scene. And Alaric, without a word, pushed it open, revealing a small, simply furnished room. Its single window looked out onto the black expanse of the night, offering no view except for the inky darkness and the faint, distant shimmer of the stars, which seemed impossibly far away from this lonely place. The room was cold, though not as piercingly cold as the courtyard or the lower hallways. It had a faint, dusty smell, like a room not used for a long time, its air stale and heavy. A narrow, wooden bed, covered with a thin, scratchy wool blanket, stood against one wall. Its plain, simple frame looked both strong and unwelcoming. A small, scarred wooden table and a single, hard-backed chair completed the few pieces of furniture, offering little comfort or welcome. Master Alaric set his lantern down on the table. Its flickering light pushed back the immediate shadows but left the corners of the room in deep, unsettling darkness. For the first time since opening the peephole, he spoke more than a few muffled words. His voice was still rough but had a hint of a strange, almost sad quality. "This is your room, Master Elias," he said, his gaze fixed on a point beyond Elias, as if speaking to a memory. "Lady Eleanor rarely has visitors these days. She keeps to herself. Your meals will be brought to you in the morning. Do not wander. The keep has many hidden paths. Paths not meant for the living." His words, spoken in such a flat, emotionless tone, were even more unsettling because they weren't dramatic. It was a chilling statement delivered as casually as someone might talk about the weather. Elias felt a fresh wave of fear wash over him, his heart again pounding against his ribs. Each beat was a frantic, urgent warning, as the meaning of Alaric's words sank in, the subtle threat woven into his warning. "Hidden paths not meant for the living," he repeated in his mind. The phrase echoed, bringing up images of dark crypts and forgotten dungeons, of ghosts and things that crawled in the dark. He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry, unable to ask a clear question. His mind spun with the unsaid horrors that Alaric's words hinted at. Alaric, seemingly happy with his mysterious warning, then turned to leave. His thin body disappeared into the darkness of the hallway without looking back. Elias was left alone in the small, cold room, with only the flickering lantern and the huge, obvious silence of Blackwood Keep for company. This silence now felt less like a lack of sound and more like a presence, a heavy, watching being that pressed in on him from every shadowed corner. Its unseen gaze watched his every move. As the last faint sound of Alaric's shuffling footsteps faded into the heavy quiet, Elias was left with the chilling certainty that his arrival at Blackwood Keep was not just a job to copy papers, but the unwilling first step into a deep and dangerous mystery. A mystery that, as Master Alaric's words continued to echo in his tired mind, he might not live to solve. Elias stood perfectly still in the small, cold room, the old man Alaric's words. "Hidden paths, not meant for the living," ringing in his tired mind like a ghostly bell that refused to stop echoing, each faint vibration sending a fresh wave of ice through his veins as he stared into the oppressive darkness of the corners, where the flickering light of the lantern on the plain wooden table danced and swayed, making the shadows stretch and shrink on the rough stone walls, twisting themselves into strange, fleeting shapes that looked like grim faces, then gnarled hands reaching out, only to vanish and reform into something else equally unsettling. And with every flicker, he felt a heavy, unseen presence in the room, not a person, no, but something profoundly cold and ancient, something watchful and judging, pressing in on him from every shadowed corner, making the very air feel thick and hard to breathe. He tried desperately to tell himself that it was just his imagination, working overtime because he was so tired from the long, frightening journey and spooked by the strange, withered old man, Alaric, who moved like a shadow and spoke in riddles, but a hard, cold knot of pure fear tightened in his stomach, a physical weight that made him feel heavy and rooted to the spot, unable to move or even think clearly, and he swallowed hard. His throat dry, his heart still pounding a frantic rhythm. Against his ribs, as if trying to beat its way out of his chest, a desperate bird trapped in a cage. He slowly turned his head, looking around the small, simple room, hoping to find just one thing, anything, that might offer some comfort, some small sign of normal life in this desolate fortress. But there was truly none to be found. The thin, scratchy wool blanket on the narrow, hard wooden bed looked far too small and weak to keep out the deep, pervasive chill that seemed to seep from the very stones, and the single, hard-backed chair promised no rest, only more discomfort for his already aching body. With a deep sigh that sounded shaky and lost in the overwhelming quiet of the castle, Elias walked slowly to the single window, its glass pane thick with grime and cold to the touch, and he pressed his nose against it, hoping to catch a glimpse of something, anything, from the outside world. But all he saw was absolute darkness, a heavy, endless blackness that seemed to swallow even the faintest shimmer of distant starlight, making him feel even more completely cut off and alone from the world. He knew, a world of bustling markets, friendly faces, and the comforting sounds of daily life, now impossibly far away, and he couldn't even make out the familiar outline of the courtyard below, just a black void that offered no comfort, only deeper despair. The silence was, by far, the worst part of Blackwood Keep. It wasn't the peaceful, calming quiet of a country night, where you might hear the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind or the distant hoot of an owl, or even the faint chirping of crickets. No, this was a heavy, unnatural stillness that seemed to hum with unspoken secrets, a suffocating quiet that pressed in on him from all sides, making his ears ache and his thoughts feel impossibly loud inside his own head. He listened with every fiber of his being, straining to catch any sound at all, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, even the tiny squeak of a mouse scurrying behind the walls, which would have been a welcome sound. But there was nothing, absolutely nothing. It was as if sound itself was afraid to exist within these ancient, dark walls, as if some unseen force actively silenced every potential noise, leaving behind only this profound, terrifying emptiness. Elias shivered again, a deep, bone-chilling tremor that had nothing to do with the cold air, and he pulled his already threadbare cloak even tighter around his shoulders, trying to create some small pocket of warmth. But it was no use, the chill seemed to come from within him now, born of pure fear, and he sat heavily on the very edge of the hard bed, the rough wool of the blanket doing little to warm his shivering body. His eyes darting restlessly around the gloom-filled room, half expecting some dark shape to emerge from the deeper shadows. He reached for the flickering lantern, turning it slightly to make its weak light a bit brighter, hoping against hope that he could chase away some of the threatening shadows that clung stubbornly to the edges of the room, like hungry beasts waiting to pounce. As he did, his fingers brushed against the smooth, cold surface of the wooden table, and he noticed something truly odd, something that made his heart skip a beat and brought a sudden, sharp focus to his wandering mind. Carved faintly into the ancient wood, almost completely worn away by centuries of time and countless hands brushing over it, was a series of strange symbols. They were definitely not letters he recognized from any language he had studied in his years as a scribe, nor were they simple, decorative patterns that a craftsman might carve to make furniture pretty. No, these looked like small, twisted lines and tight loops, carefully etched into the wood, forming a complex pattern that seemed to repeat endlessly, spiraling inwards towards a central point, almost exactly like a tiny, intricate labyrinth, or a very old, forgotten puzzle. He leaned closer, his brow furrowed in deep concentration, his fear momentarily forgotten in the face of this unexpected mystery, and as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, a faint, almost imperceptible gleam of something metallic caught his eye within one of the deeper, darker grooves of the carving, right at its very center, a tiny spark of light that seemed to almost pulse with a hidden energy. Curious, and despite a growing sense of unease, he tried to pick at it with his fingernail, hoping to dislodge it and see what it was, but it was firmly embedded, just a tiny speck, unyielding to his touch, as if it had become one with the ancient wood itself, and the more he tried, the more stubborn it seemed, reflecting the lantern light back at him like a defiant, winking eye. He imagined it might be a fragment of an old coin, perhaps, or a tiny piece of a broken jewel, but the way it was placed, right in the heart of the spiraling symbols, suggested it was more important than just a forgotten bit of metal. He ran his fingertip over the rough edges of the carving again, trying to make sense of the strange marks, tracing their intricate twists and turns, feeling the faint ridges and valleys they created in the wood, but they only deepened the mystery, adding another layer to the already unsettling strangeness of Blackwood Keep, making the hairs on his arms stand up with a peculiar tingling sensation, as if the carvings themselves held some strange, static energy. He found himself wondering who had made these carvings, and why. Were they a warning? A map? A secret message left by some long-dead prisoner or a desperate soul who once occupied this very room? The thought sent a fresh wave of goosebumps across his skin, and he felt a strange, compelling urge to solve the puzzle, to understand the hidden meaning behind the twisted lines and the stubbornly embedded metallic speck. He tried to think logically, as a scribe should, to analyze the patterns, to look for any recognizable shapes or forms, but his mind felt clouded by the deep sense of isolation and the oppressive quiet that surrounded him. He found himself getting lost in the labyrinthine design, his gaze following the endless spirals, feeling a strange pull, almost as if the carving itself was trying to draw him in, to reveal something ancient and terrible. He spent what felt like a long time, maybe minutes, maybe hours, completely absorbed in the carving, his weariness fading slightly, replaced by a growing, almost feverish curiosity, the only sound in the room being his own ragged breathing and the soft hiss of the lantern. He felt an undeniable connection to the person who had left these marks, a silent communication across centuries, a shared moment of silent dread and lonely observation in this desolate room, and he wondered if they too had felt the same crushing silence, the same watchful presence. And just then, from somewhere deep within the thick stone walls, a faint, rhythmic thump-thump began, a slow, heavy pulse that seemed to come not from his own chest, but from the very bones of the castle itself, a sound so unexpected and eerie that it made Elias jump, pulling his hand away from the carving as if it had burned him. The thumping was muffled, as if coming from many layers of stone, yet it was distinctly there, a slow, deliberate beat that seemed to resonate through the floor beneath his feet and up into his very bones, a sound that was too regular, too deep, to be an animal, and too slow to be anything urgent, yet filled with an unnerving, deliberate quality. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it was undeniably present, a low, throbbing sound that cut through the profound silence of the room like a dull axe, making the oppressive quiet even more terrifying in its sudden interruption. And Elias held his breath, straining his ears, trying to pinpoint its source, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, vibrating through the ancient masonry. The thump-thump continued, slow and steady, like a giant, unseen heart beating somewhere far below, or perhaps above, or even within the very walls themselves, and his mind, already reeling from the strange carving and Alaric's unsettling words, now struggled to comprehend this new, auditory mystery. Was it a mechanism? An old clock deep within the keep? Or something far more sinister, something alive, yet not quite human? The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through him, making his skin prickle with goosebumps. He looked back at the carving on the table, then at the closed, heavy door of his room, then to the impenetrable darkness outside his window, feeling utterly trapped, utterly alone, with only the mysterious symbols and the unnerving, rhythmic thump-thump for company. And as the sound continued its slow, steady beat, a terrible realization began to dawn on him. A chilling thought that whispered through his mind like the wind through the castle's ancient turrets. This sound, this heartbeat of Blackwood Keep, whatever it was not just a random noise. It felt deliberate, almost purposeful, as if it was meant to be heard, meant to be felt, meant to pull him deeper into the castle's dark secrets, a rhythmic, hypnotic invitation to a mystery he was increasingly sure he did not want to solve, but knew, with a terrible certainty, that he could not ignore. The slow, deep thump-thump, thump-thump continued, a persistent, unsettling heartbeat of the castle itself, vibrating through the cold stone floor and up into Elias's very bones, shaking him from his frightened stillness. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm of its own, trying to outpace the mysterious thumping, but it was useless. The sound was everywhere, seeping into his mind, dulling his fear just enough to let a dangerous, persistent curiosity take root, like a stubborn weed growing in barren ground. He told himself he was a scribe, a man of logic and reason, and that this strange noise surely had a simple explanation, perhaps an old pump, or a heavy mechanism moving deep within the fortress, a mundane sound twisted into something sinister by his tired, overactive imagination. But even as he tried to convince himself, a deeper part of him, the part that had felt the chill of the innkeeper's warning and the unnerving stare of Master Alaric, knew that this was no ordinary sound. This was a sound that belonged to Blackwood Keep alone, a secret murmur from its ancient depths. He found himself slowly, almost against his will, rising from the edge of the hard bed, his legs feeling heavy and stiff, as if the cold had seeped into his joints. The lantern, still flickering on the small wooden table, cast its weak, yellow glow, making the mysterious carved symbols seem to writhe and beckon him, almost urging him to follow the sound. He picked up the lantern, its metal handle cold in his clammy hand, and walked cautiously towards the heavy, wooden door of his chamber, his gaze fixed on the worn tapestries that lined the silent hallway beyond, now shrouded in even deeper shadows than before. Every instinct screamed at him to stay put, to huddle under the thin blanket and pray for the morning light, but the hypnotic thump-thump pulled at him, a silent, powerful force drawing him out of his room, demanding to be understood. He reached for the iron latch, his fingers brushing against the cold, rough metal, and with a soft click and a faint, rusty squeal, the door slowly opened, revealing the long, dark corridor. The air in the hallway felt even colder than his room, damp and heavy, carrying a faint, musty smell that now seemed to mingle with the metallic tang he had noticed earlier, creating a strange, unappetizing mix that made his stomach churn. The tapestries on the walls, with their faded images of long-dead lords and ladies, seemed to watch him with their painted eyes, their expressions grim and sorrowful, their silent gazes following his every hesitant step, and the shadows they cast danced and swayed with the lantern's movement, twisting into mocking shapes and ghostly figures that seemed to stretch out slender, clawed fingers towards him from the deeper gloom. The thump-thump was clearer here, a little louder, a steady, measured beat that resonated through the very stone beneath his boots, and Elias could feel it vibrating up through his soles, a deep hum that seemed to lead him in a specific direction. It sounded like it was coming from further down the hallway, towards the far end, away from the staircase he had used to come up. Taking a shaky breath, Elias began to walk, slowly at first, then with a growing, nervous determination, his own footsteps surprisingly loud in the overwhelming silence of the castle, each sound echoing eerily down the deserted corridor. He held the lantern high, trying to push back the encroaching darkness, but the light seemed weak and small against the vast, oppressive gloom of Blackwood Keep. He passed door after door, each one heavy and closed, each one adorned with a faded tapestry that seemed to guard the secrets within, and he wondered if anyone else lived in this colossal fortress, or if Alaric and Lady Eleanor were truly the only living souls, and if so, where were they? Why was the castle so eerily silent, save for this strange, rhythmic thumping? The lack of other human presence, the complete absence of any everyday sounds, made the thump-thump even more terrifying, turning it into the singular, unnatural sound of a ghost-ridden place. His heart continued its frantic drum, and his palms grew slick with sweat, but he kept going, drawn by an irresistible force, a morbid fascination that overpowered his fear. As he neared the end of the long hallway, the thump-thump grew noticeably louder, no longer muffled, but clear and distinct, a deep, resonating beat that seemed to shake the very foundations of the castle. It felt closer now, very close, and Elias could feel the vibrations even more strongly in the soles of his feet. At the very end of the corridor, where he had expected to find another wall, or perhaps a window looking out onto the back of the keep, there was instead a heavy, plain wooden door, much simpler than the others, with no tapestry, no carvings, just dark, unadorned wood, looking almost like an afterthought, a hidden entrance that didn't want to be noticed. The door had no handle, no latch, no visible way to open it, just a single, tarnished iron ring set deeply into the wood, almost flush with the surface, as if it were meant to be pulled. The thump-thump seemed to emanate directly from behind this door, a powerful, rhythmic pulse that filled the air around him, making the lantern light tremble faintly. Elias hesitated, his hand hovering near the iron ring, a sudden, cold dread washing over him. Alaric's warning: "Do not wander. The keep has many hidden paths. Paths not meant for the living," came crashing back into his mind, loud and clear. This felt like one of those hidden paths. This felt like a path not meant for him. But the compelling thump-thump was too strong, too insistent, a siren song that drew him in despite his fear. He took another deep, shaky breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and then, with a surge of desperate courage, grasped the cold iron ring. It felt rough beneath his fingers, heavy and unmoving. He pulled. Nothing happened. He pulled again, harder this time, bracing his feet against the stone floor, putting all his weight into it. With a loud, grating screech that echoed painfully through the silent hallway, like a tortured scream of metal against stone, the hidden door slowly, reluctantly, began to open inwards, revealing not a room or another corridor, but a small, dark, winding stairway leading downwards into what appeared to be a black, yawning abyss, and the thump-thump was now deafening, vibrating through his entire body, a monstrous, booming pulse that seemed to call to him from the inky depths below, a terrifying, irresistible invitation to descend into the very heart of Blackwood Keep's darkest secret. The booming thump-thump was no longer just a sound, but a physical force, shaking Elias from head to toe, rattling his teeth and making his vision blur slightly, a monstrous, echoing pulse that seemed to call to him from the black, yawning abyss of the winding stairway that now lay open before him. The hidden door, old and groaning, hung ajar, revealing steps that vanished almost immediately into absolute darkness, a void so complete that even the strong, flickering light of his lantern seemed to shrink back, unable to pierce the heavy gloom beyond the first few steps. Every bone in Elias's body screamed at him to run, to slam the door shut, to forget this place and its terrifying heartbeats, to find his way back to his cold, uncomfortable room and simply wait for the impossible light of dawn. But the thump-thump was relentless, a hypnotic beat that had burrowed deep into his mind, overpowering his fear with a strange, almost feverish curiosity that he could not, for the life of him, shake off. It was as if the castle itself was alive, a monstrous creature whose vast, ancient heart was beating right there, beneath his feet, and it was drawing him closer, demanding his attention, pulling him into its depths with an invisible, unbreakable rope. He remembered Master Alaric's chilling warning: "Do not wander. The keep has many hidden paths. Paths not meant for the living." And the words echoed in his mind like a solemn, unavoidable prophecy, a dark promise that he was now, against all common sense, fulfilling. This was a path not meant for the living, he was sure of it, and yet, he found his feet moving, slowly, cautiously, towards the first step, his mind a swirling mix of terror and an overwhelming need to know, to understand, to witness the source of this terrifying, rhythmic sound that had consumed his night. He took the first step down, his boots scraping softly on the rough, uneven stone. The air instantly grew colder, thicker, with an even stronger scent of damp earth, old iron, and that strange, metallic, cloying smell that he still couldn't quite place, but which now seemed to almost taste of something ancient and unliving, a taste that was bitter and strangely sweet at the same time, making his mouth water with a sick kind of dread. The thump-thump intensified with each descending step, filling his ears, vibrating against his eardrums until it felt like his head was inside a giant, resonating drum. He held the lantern out in front of him, his hand trembling so violently that the flame danced wildly, casting frantic, jumping shadows that made the already terrifying descent even more disorienting. The stone steps were narrow, winding downwards in a tight spiral, and they were slippery, covered in a thin, slimy layer of moss and condensation, making each step a perilous act of balance. Elias had to grip the rough, cold stone wall with his free hand, his fingers scraping against the uneven surface, searching for purchase, anything to keep him from tumbling headfirst into the crushing blackness below. The descent felt endless. He counted the steps, but soon lost track, his mind fogged by the deafening thumping and the dizzying spiral. One step blurred into another, each one bringing him deeper into the earth, deeper into the heart of the mystery, and further away from any hope of safety or escape. The walls pressed in on him, cold and unyielding, making him feel as though the very stone was trying to crush him, to absorb him into its ancient, dark embrace. He imagined the vast weight of the castle above him, pressing down, 1,000 tons of stone and forgotten history, and a suffocating wave of claustrophobia washed over him, making his breath catch in his throat. He wanted to scream, to turn back, to claw his way up the stairs, but the thump-thump held him captive, a relentless, primal rhythm that seemed to command his very movement, forcing him ever downwards, against his will, against his every instinct. His thoughts began to swim, blurring into a confused mess, as if the oppressive silence of the castle combined with the rhythmic booming was twisting his very perception of reality. Time seemed to stretch and warp, minutes feeling like hours, hours feeling like an eternity. He wondered if he had been descending for an age, or only a few moments. His body ached, his legs burned from the constant strain, and his arm, holding the heavy lantern, felt like lead, but he could not stop. He was a moth drawn to a terrifying, deadly flame, unable to break free from its pull. The metallic smell grew stronger, now mingled with a faint, sweet decay, a smell that made his stomach clench and his throat burn, a smell that was undeniably that of old blood, but mixed with something else, something cloying and sickly, like forgotten flowers or ancient, spoiled fruit. It was a smell that spoke of lingering death and unnatural preservation, a smell that tightened the knot of dread in his gut until he felt sick with fear. The lantern, his only beacon in this oppressive gloom, seemed to grow weaker, its light struggling against the thick, inky blackness that seemed to cling to the walls, to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The shadows it cast were no longer dancing, but heavy, permanent things, stretching out like grasping claws from every crevice, every uneven stone, turning the already terrifying stairway into a monstrous, living maw that was slowly swallowing him whole. He peered into the darkness below, trying to see the bottom, but it remained elusive, an unending descent into the unknown. Finally, just as he thought his legs would give out, just as he was sure he would stumble and fall into the waiting blackness, the spiral staircase made one last, sharp turn, and then abruptly ended. Elias stumbled forward, catching himself against the rough stone archway that led into a vast, cavernous chamber. The thump-thump here was overwhelming, a deep, resonating boom that filled the entire space, vibrating through the very air, making his ears ache and his head throb with a dull, insistent pain, a sound so powerful that he felt it not just in his body, but in his very soul. He held the lantern high, his hands still shaking, and his eyes, wide with a mixture of terror and awe, scanned the enormous room. It was far larger than any chamber he had seen in the keep above, its ceiling lost in the oppressive darkness high above, its rough-hewn stone walls stretching away into the gloom, supported by massive, ancient pillars carved directly from the living rock, pillars that looked like the legs of some colossal, petrified beast holding up the weight of the entire mountain. The metallic, decaying smell here was almost unbearable, thick and suffocating, making him gag, and the air was strangely still, heavy with dust and an unnatural cold that seemed to sink into his very bones, a cold that felt older than time itself. But what truly froze Elias to the spot, making his breath catch in his throat and his heart seize with a terror far greater than anything he had felt before, was the sight in the center of the chamber. There, in the very middle of this forgotten, subterranean hall, was the undeniable source of the relentless thump-thump. It was a truly colossal mechanism, ancient and monstrous, unlike anything Elias had ever seen or even imagined. It was made of dark, pitted iron and heavy, scarred wood, a towering construct that reached almost to the invisible ceiling, its surface covered in countless gears and levers and massive, slowly turning wheels, all working in a grim, silent, synchronized ballet, all pushing and pulling, grinding and clanking, though the thump-thump drowned out most other sounds. The central part of this incredible machine was a single, enormous pendulum, a gigantic slab of dark, polished stone, at least 10 feet long, covered in the same strange, spiraling symbols he had seen carved on the table in his room, symbols that seemed to glow faintly with a sickly, internal light in the dimness. This immense pendulum swung slowly, ponderously, from side to side, a silent, relentless rhythm, and it was the base of this massive stone slab, where it met the floor, that caused the deafening thump-thump as it struck a hidden, padded indentation in the stone floor with each swing, a sound that resonated through the entire chamber, shaking the very earth beneath his feet. The sheer size and age of the mechanism were terrifying, but it was the purpose that truly sent a chill of profound dread through Elias. This was no ordinary clock, no simple pump. This was a machine of immense power, built for a grand, terrible purpose, kept hidden deep within the earth, tirelessly performing its unknown function for centuries, perhaps even millennia. He stared at the glowing symbols on the pendulum, feeling a strange, magnetic pull, a dark fascination, as if they held the key to understanding this entire, horrifying place. Around the base of the colossal machine, etched into the very floor, were more of the spiraling symbols, larger now, forming a vast, intricate circle, almost like a massive, ancient summoning circle, or a diagram of a forgotten ritual, and in the center of this circle, directly beneath where the pendulum swung, was a shallow, circular indentation in the stone, a basin that was dry now, but the dark, reddish-brown stains that clung to its edges, thick and ancient, left no doubt as to what it had once contained. Blood. So much blood. The metallic, decaying smell intensified around the basin, making his stomach lurch, confirming his worst fears. This machine, this monstrous clock of Blackwood Keep, had been fed, repeatedly, with the lifeblood of countless victims, its terrible rhythm fueled by sacrifice, and a wave of overwhelming nausea washed over Elias, making him feel lightheaded and dizzy. He stumbled backwards, away from the horrifying basin, his eyes wide with unspeakable terror, his mind screaming in silent protest against the gruesome truth he had just uncovered. This was not a castle, not merely a home for a reclusive lady and her withered servant. This was a tomb, a prison, a place of dark rituals and ancient, unspeakable horrors, and he was now trapped within its deepest, most terrible secret. He looked up at the towering pendulum, swinging with its relentless, booming thump-thump, and now, in the faint, trembling light of his lantern, he noticed something else, something even more chilling. Etched into the dark, polished stone of the pendulum, just above the glowing symbols, were countless tiny, almost invisible scratch marks, faint lines that, when he squinted, looked like desperate, clawing attempts to carve something, anything, into the unyielding stone. He raised his lantern higher, stepping closer, his fear warring with his morbid fascination, and as the light caught the marks just right, he realized with a sickening jolt that they were not random scratches. They were letters, hastily carved, overlapping each other, forming fragmented words and names, a terrifying mosaic of despair. He leaned in further, trying to decipher them, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from his chest, and he made out fragments. "Help me, Alexis, never ends, lost, Elara," they watched the cycle. And then, a series of symbols identical to the ones on the table in his room. But here, they were far more numerous, more deeply etched, as if carved by a hand driven by ultimate desperation. These were messages, desperate cries from those who had been here before him, trapped, tormented, forced to witness the endless, booming rhythm of the blood-fueled machine, until their lives, their very essences, were consumed by its terrible purpose. The machine was not just a mechanism, it was a living monument to suffering, a silent, tireless devourer of souls, and Elias realized, with a cold, horrifying certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he was looking at the last desperate acts of those who had become part of its grim history. The metallic smell, the cloying decay, the oppressive cold, the deafening thump-thump, it all suddenly made terrible, horrifying sense, forming a complete, unspeakable picture of dread. He was standing in a place where lives were taken, not quickly, not mercifully, but slowly, ritually, fed to this ancient, hungry device, and the realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, stealing his breath, making his knees weak. The walls of the vast chamber, though rough-hewn, seemed to be watching him, the shadows deepening around the massive pillars, turning them into silent, watchful guardians of this horrific secret, and the ceiling, still invisible in the absolute blackness above, felt like a heavy, suffocating lid, sealing him into this subterranean nightmare. He was truly, utterly alone, deeper than he had ever imagined possible, in the dark, beating heart of Blackwood Keep, and the air itself seemed to crackle with the lingering echoes of countless screams and unspoken prayers, a suffocating weight of past suffering that pressed down on him, threatening to crush his sanity. His lantern, his only small source of light, now seemed to flicker even more weakly, as if it too was struggling to survive in this place of absolute darkness and despair, its tiny flame a fragile defiance against the overwhelming gloom that threatened to swallow him whole. And as he stared at the terrifying pendulum, still swinging with its booming, blood-soaked rhythm, a new, even more horrifying thought began to form in his mind. Chilling him to the very core, a thought that made his blood run cold and his breath freeze in his lungs, a question that twisted his gut into a tight, sickening knot. What was the purpose of this machine? What did it do with the lives it consumed? And perhaps most terrifyingly of all, if it was still operating, who was maintaining it? Who was still feeding it? The heavy thump-thump filled the silence, and Elias felt a cold hand of dread grip his heart, realizing he wasn't just observing history. He was standing on the precipice of becoming a part of it. Realizing he wasn't just observing history. He was standing on the precipice of becoming a part of it. The cold hand of dread that had gripped Elias's heart tightened further, squeezing the very breath from his lungs, leaving him gasping for air in the heavy, ancient chamber, his entire body trembling violently, a raw, uncontrollable fear that turned his limbs to lead, making his knees feel so weak he thought they might give out at any moment and send him sprawling onto the cold, blood-stained stone floor. Right beside the horrifying basin that still reeked of metallic decay and untold suffering. A smell that now clung to him, saturating his clothes and hair, pressing into his very skin as he stumbled backward, away from the colossal, booming pendulum, away from the gruesome, silent testament to countless vanished lives, his mind screaming in a silent, desperate protest against the unspeakable truth he had unearthed. He wanted to close his eyes, to shut out the terrible sight of the blood-stained basin and the desperate, carved messages on the swinging stone, but his eyelids felt frozen open, forced to witness every horrifying detail, every glint of light on the dark, polished surface of the pendulum, every slow, deliberate swing of the monstrous mechanism that now seemed to fill his entire world with its deafening, relentless thump-thump. Thump-thump. The sound was no longer just an unsettling rhythm. It was a physical assault, a monstrous, booming pulse that resonated through his bones, through his very skull, making his teeth ache and his vision blur around the edges, as if the entire world were shaking apart, crumbling into dust under the sheer, brutal force of this ancient, terrible heart. This wasn't just a castle, he realized with a sickening certainty. This was a living tomb, a vast, hungry entity whose very existence was powered by the desperate final moments of human lives, a monstrous, silent devourer of souls hidden deep beneath the earth, relentlessly pursuing its unknown, terrifying purpose. And Elias was no longer an observer, no longer a humble scribe on a simple mission, but a fly caught in a spider's web, now tangled in the very fabric of its unspeakable horror, trapped within its deepest, most guarded secret. The air in the cavernous chamber felt thick, heavy with the oppressive weight of past suffering, a suffocating blanket woven from fear and despair, and Elias could almost taste the lingering echoes of countless screams, the silent pleas of those who had come before him, trapped and sacrificed to this insatiable machine. It clung to his tongue, a bitter, metallic taste that mingled with the cloying sweetness of decay, making him gag, and he pressed a trembling hand over his mouth, trying to hold back the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm him, his stomach churning violently with a mixture of terror and disgust. His lantern, his only small source of light, now seemed to flicker even more weakly, its tiny flame a fragile defiance against the overwhelming gloom that pressed in from every side, as if the absolute darkness itself was alive, hostile, trying to smother the last vestige of light, to plunge him into an eternal, terrifying night, and he hugged it closer, the metal of its handle cold and clammy in his sweating palm, his knuckles white with the desperate grip. He looked around the vast chamber, his wide eyes darting from shadow to shadow, from the rough-hewn stone walls that stretched away into the gloom to the massive, ancient pillars carved from the living rock, which now seemed to him like the petrified legs of some colossal, slumbering beast, its unblinking eyes watching him from the depths of the shadows. Every dark corner, every deep crevice in the stone, seemed to hold a hidden threat, a lurking presence, and his imagination, usually a tool for crafting stories, now became his tormentor, conjuring monstrous forms and shadowy figures from every flicker of the dying light, making him jump at every imagined movement, every phantom whisper in the booming silence. The terrifying questions that had formed in his mind just moments before now crashed over him with renewed, crushing force. What was the purpose of this machine? What did it do with the lives it consumed? And perhaps most terrifyingly of all, if it was still operating, if its rhythmic thump-thump was indeed a constant, unwavering testament to its tireless function, then who was maintaining it? Who was still feeding it? The thought sent a fresh, icy spike of terror directly into his heart, making his breath hitch in his throat. He was not alone in this keep, he realized with a sickening certainty. Master Alaric, the withered old man with the vacant, knowing eyes, the one who had spoken of paths not meant for the living, he knew. And Lady Eleanor, the reclusive mistress of Blackwood Keep, the one who rarely receives visitors these days. She must also know. Were they the custodians of this horror? Were they the ones who continued to feed the monstrous machine, to keep its terrible heart beating with fresh blood? The idea was so abhorrent, so utterly monstrous, that Elias's mind struggled to accept it, yet the evidence before him, the blood-stained basin, the desperate inscriptions, the relentless, blood-fueled thump-thump, left no room for doubt. They were guardians of a horrifying legacy, and he, Elias, the humble scribe, had unwittingly stumbled into their unspeakable secret, a secret that demanded silence, a silence that could only be ensured by his own demise. He was no longer just an unexpected visitor. He was an unwanted witness, a loose end, a potential next offering to the relentless, booming heart of Blackwood Keep, and the realization hit him with a cold, paralyzing clarity. His body, already weakened by exhaustion and fear, began to betray him. A wave of dizziness washed over him, making the already trembling lantern in his hand sway precariously, and the thump-thump seemed to gain an even more sinister resonance, as if mocking his weakness, celebrating his inevitable fate. He squeezed his eyes shut for a brief moment, trying to regain his composure, to clear the sickening fog from his mind, but when he opened them again, the terror was magnified, the cavernous chamber seeming to grow even larger, even more menacing, its ancient walls pressing in on him, threatening to crush him, and the towering machine with its monstrous pendulum seemed to fill his entire field of vision, its glowing symbols pulsing with a faint, malevolent light that seemed to draw him closer, to mesmerize him with its ancient, dark power. He could feel the weight of centuries of despair, of agony, of vanished hopes, pressing down on him, a suffocating shroud that clung to his very soul, and he felt a desperate, primal urge to flee, to run, to claw his way back up the winding, slippery staircase, to escape this hellish nightmare and find the blessed, purifying light of the sun, to leave this place and its terrible secrets behind forever. But which way was up? The endless descent had left him utterly disoriented, his sense of direction completely lost in the labyrinthine darkness of the keep. He spun around frantically, his lantern casting wild, erratic shadows that leaped and writhed across the walls, turning the rough stone into a swirling vortex of grotesque shapes, and he peered into the gloom, trying to locate the narrow archway through which he had entered, but it seemed to have vanished, swallowed by the indistinguishable darkness and the confusing array of massive pillars that supported the ceiling, each one looking identical in the weak, trembling light. Panic began to claw at his throat, a raw, choking sensation that made it impossible to breathe, to think, to even form a coherent thought, and he felt the icy grip of despair tightening around him, stealing his last vestiges of hope. The relentless thump-thump continued, an unfeeling, mechanical dirge that seemed to celebrate his growing panic, and now, amidst its booming rhythm, Elias thought he heard something else, something subtle, almost imperceptible beneath the dominant thudding, a faint, soft shuffle, scrape, a sound that was not part of the machine, a sound that was unmistakably separate, coming from somewhere in the deeper shadows of the vast chamber. A sound that was too deliberate, too knowing to be mere imagination. His blood ran colder than the stone beneath his feet, if such a thing were possible, and his heart, already a frantic drum, now slammed against his ribs with such force he thought it might shatter. He froze, his head snapping around, his eyes wide and wild, desperately trying to pierce the gloom, to locate the source of that terrifying new sound, that soft, knowing shuffle. But the shadows were too deep, too vast, too absolute, and the lantern's light, already struggling, seemed to dim even further, as if reacting to the unseen presence, its flame shrinking to a nervous, sputtering flicker. He held his breath, every muscle in his body rigid, straining to hear it again, that quiet, deliberate shuffle, scrape, and for a long, agonizing moment, there was only the deafening thump-thump of the monstrous pendulum, filling the air, vibrating through him, seeming to mock his terror. Then, from the very edge of the lantern's weak, trembling circle of light, from behind one of the colossal, ancient pillars that seemed to dissolve into the absolute darkness beyond, a shadow detached itself, slowly, deliberately, a long, thin, impossibly bent figure that moved with a quiet, shuffling grace, as if it were a natural part of the surrounding gloom, a figure that was unmistakable, even in the faint, terrified light, Master Alaric. The old man stood there, just at the edge of the light, his form thin and ethereal, his face, a road map of deep wrinkles, seemed even more ancient and terrifying in this subterranean chamber. His eyes, those vacant, knowing eyes, now fixed directly on Elias with an unnerving, unblinking intensity that was chilling in its complete lack of surprise or emotion, almost as if he had been expecting Elias all along. Waiting for him, watching him descend into this very horror. He held no lantern, no torch, yet he seemed to see perfectly in the gloom, his presence radiating a cold, ancient power that seemed to drain all the remaining warmth from the air, all the remaining hope from Elias's heart, and he said nothing, just stood there, a silent, grim sentinel, a living ghost in the heart of the dead castle, his silence more terrifying than any scream. Elias felt his blood run cold, his mouth dry, unable to utter a single sound, his voice trapped in his constricted throat, his body paralyzed by a fear so profound, so absolute, that it felt like an actual physical weight pressing him down, holding him captive. Alaric had been here. He had followed Elias. Or perhaps, he had never left. The realization struck Elias like a hammer blow, making his already reeling mind spin even faster. He hadn't just stumbled upon a hidden path, he had been led to it. His assignment, from Lord Reginald, the cryptic warnings, the lack of guards, the unsettling silence, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity, forming a complete, utterly monstrous picture. He wasn't a scribe sent on a task. He was the next offering, an unwitting lamb led to the slaughter, destined to fuel the rhythmic thump-thump of the blood machine, his essence to be consumed, his last desperate pleas to be carved into the stone pendulum alongside Alexis and Ilara. The thought was too much. His vision swam, the cavernous chamber tilting precariously, the booming thump-thump of the machine and the silent, watchful gaze of Master Alaric threatening to shatter his sanity, and as the old man, with an impossibly slow, deliberate movement, raised one skeletal hand, pointing a long, bony finger not at Elias, but at the blood-stained basin in the center of the vast, horrific mechanism, Elias knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that his short, terrifying journey into the heart of Blackwood Keep had reached its inevitable, gruesome conclusion, and that this night, indeed, would be his last. Elias stood paralyzed, a frozen statue of despair and terror, his eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on Master Alaric's skeletal hand, that long, bony finger now pointing with deliberate, slow menace directly at the blood-stained basin. The chilling silent command echoing in the deafening thump-thump of the colossal pendulum, a sound that now seemed to drum the very rhythm of his impending doom, each beat a step closer to an unspeakable end. His mind, once a place of logic and careful thought, was now a storm of chaotic fear, swirling with fragmented images. Bartholomew, his faithful pony, waiting patiently in the stable above, unaware of the horror unfolding below. Lord Reginald's bustling manor, a distant dream of warmth and safety. The countless faces of the innocent victims whose desperate pleas were etched into the pendulum stone, their names, Alexis, Ilara, burning themselves into his mind as a grim reminder of his own fate, and the horrifying metallic, cloying smell of old blood, now so intense it felt like it was filling his lungs, suffocating him with its ancient, terrible stench. He couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even scream, his throat choked by a fear so profound it was physical, an invisible hand squeezing his windpipe, stealing his breath, rendering him utterly helpless, his body a mere puppet to the overwhelming terror that had consumed his very being, turning his muscles to stone, his bones to ice. Master Alaric's vacant, knowing eyes, ancient and cold, held no hatred, no anger, no emotion at all, only a profound, unsettling emptiness, a chilling reflection of the absolute darkness that surrounded them, and that lack of feeling was, in its own way, far more terrifying than any rage, for it spoke of a duty, a ritual, performed countless times over centuries, a grim, unfeeling adherence to a monstrous, unholy purpose that stretched back into the forgotten depths of time, making Elias just another anonymous face in a long, endless line of sacrifices. The old man's presence, silent and still, was a heavy, inescapable weight, a sentinel of death, standing patiently at the edge of the weak, flickering lantern light, his bent form almost blending into the deeper shadows, a living ghost in the heart of the dead castle, his very stillness a profound threat that communicated an absolute, undeniable certainty of what was to come, a calm, unwavering resolve that Elias. She stopped beside Master Alaric, her silent presence radiating an even greater aura of ancient power and chilling authority, a commanding stillness that made Alaric, for all his terrifying aspect, seem merely a loyal, withered shadow in her wake. Her gaze remained locked on Elias, unwavering, as if peering directly into his very soul, reading his terror, his despair, his desperate, unspoken questions, and a cold, insidious dread began to crawl through Elias, a realization far more terrible than any he had experienced before. This was not merely a ritual of sacrifice, a grim duty performed by two unwilling custodians. This was something deeper, something far more ancient, and deeply ingrained in the very essence of Blackwood Keep. Lady Eleanor, he realized with a sickening jolt, was not a prisoner of this horror, but its willing orchestrator, its living heart, perhaps even its very purpose. Her eyes held the weight of centuries, the weary but determined gaze of someone who had long ago transcended human emotion, who had become one with the monstrous rhythm of the blood machine, a guardian of its terrible function, a living conduit for its insatiable hunger. Her presence explained the unnatural silence, the absence of any other life, the pervasive cold that seeped from the very stones, for she, Elias now understood, was not merely a woman, but something more, something fundamentally altered by the ancient power that pulsed from the colossal mechanism, a creature inextricably bound to Blackwood Keep's darkest secret, an entity that embodied the castle's malevolent spirit. The faint, glowing symbols on the pendulum seemed to pulse in synchronization with her arrival, their malevolent light growing subtly stronger, as if acknowledging their mistress, and the deafening thump-thump of the machine seemed to deepen, to resonate with a renewed, terrifying power, filling the entire chamber with an overwhelming sense of ancient, unholy purpose, its booming rhythm now feeling like a personal countdown, ticking away the last moments of Elias's life. Lady Eleanor raised a hand, even more pale and delicate than Alaric's, yet imbued with a chilling strength, and with a slow, deliberate gesture she swept her arm towards the monstrous pendulum and the blood-stained basin, a silent, damning confirmation of Alaric's earlier unspoken command. Her thin lips then parted, and a voice, impossibly old and resonant, yet devoid of any human inflection, spoke, its words echoing in the vast chamber, not a whisper, but a sound that seemed to come from the very stones themselves, a voice that carried the weight of ages, the weary wisdom of countless sacrifices, a voice that was both beautiful and terrifying, like the mournful cry of an ancient, predatory bird. "Welcome, Elias Scribe," she intoned, her gaze never leaving his, a chilling recognition in her ancient eyes that suggested she knew far more about him than a mere visitor, a terrifying familiarity that implied a long-held anticipation of his arrival, as if his journey had been planned, meticulously orchestrated, long before he even knew of Blackwood Keep's existence. "Your purpose here is not to transcribe deeds of land, but deeds of fate. The Keep demands sustenance. It demands the flow of life to maintain the balance, to prevent the ancient darkness from consuming all. You were chosen, Elias, just as others were chosen before you. It is a necessary cycle, a grim but vital service to the realm, though few understand its true nature, and fewer still are willing to accept its burdens." Her words, delivered with a calm, chilling certainty, stripped away the last vestiges of Elias's sanity, shattering any remaining hope of escape or even understanding, revealing a cosmic, terrifying purpose that extended far beyond the simple walls of a castle, linking his fate to something infinitely vast and unspeakable. He was not just a sacrifice, but a crucial part of an ancient, horrific cosmic mechanism, his life a mere drop in an ocean of blood, destined to feed a power beyond human comprehension, a dark ritual maintained for the sake of a balance he could not begin to fathom. And the implications of her words, the sheer scale of the horror, was too much for his human mind to bear. His breath hitched, a desperate, rattling sound in his chest, and his eyes, wide with unspeakable terror, darted between Lady Eleanor's ancient, unblinking gaze and the monstrous pendulum, still swinging with its booming, relentless thump-thump, each beat a deafening reminder of the inescapable truth. He looked at the desperate names carved into the stone. Alexis, Elara, and realized they weren't just names of victims, but testaments, echoing through the ages, silent screams woven into the very fabric of time, their fates now his own, their despair his inheritance. The metallic smell in the chamber intensified, almost burning his nostrils, mingled now with a faint, sickly sweet scent that he finally recognized, a smell he had encountered once in a dusty tome, described as the lingering essence of a soul unbound. A smell that turned his stomach and made his head spin with a horrifying clarity. He stumbled backward again, his legs rubbery and numb, his mind screaming in silent protest, clawing at the edges of his sanity, desperately searching for some way out, some impossible escape, some small glimmer of hope in the overwhelming darkness, but there was none. Lady Eleanor, with her ageless eyes and chillingly calm voice, the mistress of this unspeakable horror, stood like a grim deity, a goddess of sacrifice, and Master Alaric, her silent, withered shadow, was merely her devoted acolyte, both bound to the ancient, terrible rhythm of the blood machine, both complicit in the endless cycle of death and desperate pleas. The silence of the keep, he now understood, was not emptiness, but a heavy, watchful presence, the omnipresent awareness of an ancient, hungry power, patiently waiting, observing, as its next offering was prepared. And the profound cold that permeated the very stones was not merely the chill of winter, but the absence of life, the drain of countless souls into the insatiable maw of the towering mechanism. As Elias tried to form a coherent thought, a desperate question, a plea for mercy, his vision began to swim, the cavernous chamber tilting precariously, the towering machine and its booming thump-thump blurring into a monstrous, indistinct form, its glowing symbols pulsing with a malevolent, hypnotic light that seemed to draw him closer, to mesmerize him, to steal his will, and he felt a strange, detached sensation. As if his body were no longer his own, as if his very essence were being slowly, meticulously leached from him, drawn into the pulsing heart of the keep. Lady Eleanor, her gaze still fixed on him with that unnerving intensity, took a slow, deliberate step forward, her dark robes rustling with that dry, brittle sound, her hand now outstretched, not reaching for him, but gesturing towards the basin, an unspoken command that radiated ancient, undeniable power, an irresistible force that pulled at his very soul. Alaric, equally silent, moved with surprising speed for one so ancient, his bony fingers closing around Elias's arm, his grip cold and surprisingly strong, an unbreakable vice that held him captive, preventing any last, desperate attempt at flight, and Elias felt a faint, bitter taste fill his mouth, not of blood, but of ashes, the taste of endings, of forgotten futures, of a life abruptly, horribly extinguished. The lantern slipped from his trembling grasp, falling to the stone floor with a faint, metallic clang that was swallowed almost instantly by the deafening thump-thump of the pendulum, its light shattering into 1,000 flickering fragments before finally extinguishing, plunging the immediate vicinity into absolute, suffocating darkness, leaving Elias surrounded by the oppressive gloom, his only remaining senses the cold, unyielding grip on his arm, the horrifying smell of blood and decay, and the overwhelming, relentless thump-thump of the blood machine, its monstrous heart beating out the final seconds of his existence, pulling him inexorably towards the blood-stained basin, towards the ultimate, horrifying truth of Blackwood Keep, towards a fate from which there was no escape, no reprieve, only an eternal, unspeakable absorption into the ancient darkness, his name destined to be etched, a final, desperate plea into the cold, unyielding stone, becoming one with Alexis and Elara. Another forgotten soul consumed by the insatiable hunger of the keep's terrible purpose, his very essence feeding the grim, rhythmic cycle, ensuring that the monstrous pendulum continued its endless, horrifying swing for centuries more, a final, chilling testament to the fact that, indeed, he would not survive a single night in a medieval castle, especially not Blackwood Keep. The world around Elias had completely dissolved into an absolute, suffocating darkness the moment his lantern had slipped from his trembling, numb fingers, hitting the cold stone floor with a faint, metallic clang that was instantly swallowed by the deafening, all-consuming thump-thump, thump-thump of the colossal pendulum, leaving him blind, utterly lost, and terrifyingly vulnerable in the vast, subterranean chamber. His only remaining senses overwhelmed by the horrifying smell of old blood and decay, the bone-chilling cold that seemed to drain every last vestige of warmth from his body, the unyielding grip of Alaric's bony fingers on his arm, and the monstrous, relentless beat that now pulsed directly through his very skull, making his teeth ache and his vision, even in the darkness, swim with phantom lights and swirling patterns of despair. His body was no longer his own, a mere vessel dragged forward by the surprising, unyielding strength of Master Alaric, who, even in the pitch black, moved with an unnerving certainty, guiding Elias, pulling him, forcing him towards the blood-stained basin, towards the ultimate horror that awaited him at the heart of the ancient machine, and Elias twisted and writhed, a desperate, futile struggle against the unbreakable grip. His legs kicking uselessly, his hands flailing in the suffocating darkness, searching for something, anything, to grab onto, to anchor himself to, but there was nothing, only the slick, cold stone of the floor, the damp, unyielding walls, and the ever-present, suffocating gloom that pressed in on him from every side, absorbing his frantic movements, stealing his last, ragged breaths. He tried to scream, to utter a final, desperate protest against this monstrous injustice, to call out for help, for mercy, but his throat was constricted, choked by an overwhelming fear that was now so profound, so absolute, that it manifested as a physical paralysis, stealing his voice, locking his jaws shut, leaving him only with a silent, internal shriek that echoed endlessly in the terrified confines of his own mind. A silent, primal scream against the horror. Lady Eleanor, though unseen in the profound darkness, was a palpable, chilling presence beside them, her dark robes rustling with that dry, brittle sound that was not of cloth, but of ancient parchment, a sound that Elias now associated with the very essence of forgotten rituals and ageless evil, and he could feel her gaze, even in the blackness, fixed upon him with that piercing, icy intelligence, that chilling, unwavering intensity, a gaze that spoke not of human pity or compassion, but of a profound, ageless weariness, a terrible, eternal burden, and an unwavering commitment to the monstrous cycles she oversaw. He could almost hear her words, echoing in his memory, cutting through the deafening thump-thump. The keep demands sustenance. It demands the flow of life to maintain the balance, to prevent the ancient darkness from consuming all. You were chosen, Elias. It is a necessary cycle. The cruel, unfeeling logic of her pronouncement now resonated with a horrifying clarity, explaining the betrayal, the orchestrated journey, the utter despair of those whose names were etched into the pendulum, and Elias understood, with a sickening certainty, that his life, his very being, was nothing more than a necessary ingredient, a fuel for this ancient, cosmic mechanism, a single, insignificant drop in an ocean of blood destined to feed a power beyond human comprehension, a dark ritual, maintained for the sake of a balance he could not begin to fathom, a balance that demanded the endless, agonizing sacrifice of innocent lives. The metallic, cloying smell of blood intensified with every inch he was dragged forward, now so overwhelming that it felt like he was drowning in it, filling his mouth with a foul, bitter taste, making his stomach clench violently, and he fought against the rising wave of nausea, desperately trying to keep his last meal down, his body rebelling against the unspeakable horror that surrounded him. He could feel the cold, slick surface of the stone floor beneath his scrambling feet, the rough texture of the ancient rock, and then, a subtle change, the distinct, shallow lip of the circular basin, drawing closer, closer, until Alaric's grip positioned him directly above it, his feet no longer on solid ground, but hovering precariously over the dark, stained indentation. His body now completely at the mercy of the old man's relentless strength. The booming thump-thump of the pendulum now filled his entire being, resonating not just in his ears, but vibrating through every nerve, every cell, every molecule of his body, a monstrous, echoing pulse that seemed to have no origin but to be the very fabric of his existence, and he felt the massive, ancient slab of dark, polished stone directly above him, its enormous weight and unseen, terrifying presence, casting a crushing, absolute shadow that seemed to steal even the last faint flicker of internal light from his terrified mind. He could almost feel the cold, smooth surface of the pendulum, the faint, malevolent glow of the spiraling symbols that he knew were etched into its face, symbols that now pulsed with an unnatural, hungry energy, eager to absorb his very essence, and the countless tiny scratch marks, the desperate, fragmented names. Help me, Alexis, never ends, lost, Elara, they watch. The cycle, all flashed through his mind in a final, agonizing blur, a terrifying mosaic of despair, the silent screams of those who had come before him, now echoing in his own dying moments, their fates inextricably intertwined with his. He thought of Bartholomew, his loyal pony, waiting for him in the stable, of the warm sun on his face, of the simple pleasure of a quill scratching across parchment, of the bustling life of Lord Reginald's manor, all fleeting memories, distant echoes of a world that was now irrevocably lost, erased by the suffocating darkness and the relentless beat of this infernal machine. A profound, aching sorrow washed over him, not just for his own imminent death, but for the countless others, for the endless cycle of suffering, for the sheer, unfeeling cruelty of this ancient, terrible purpose, and in that moment, a desperate, almost defiant spark ignited within him, a final, internal protest against the monstrous power that sought to consume him. He was not just a body, he thought, not just flesh and blood to be fed to this hungry device. He was Elias, a scribe, a man who had seen wonders and terrors, who had loved, who had feared, who had lived, and in his last, fleeting moments of consciousness, he would not simply be absorbed, he would bear witness, he would remember, and in that act of remembrance, he would defy the oblivion that awaited him. His thoughts becoming his final act of rebellion, his internal scream a testament to his stolen life. The cold grip on his arm tightened, pulling him even lower, positioning him perfectly over the basin, and the thump-thump above him intensified, growing to an unbearable, deafening roar, a crescendo of ancient power, and he felt the air itself being displaced by the monstrous descent of the pendulum, a crushing pressure that stole his breath completely, making his chest burn with a desperate, agonizing emptiness. He heard a faint, dry rustle of Lady Eleanor's robes, a final, almost imperceptible shift in the oppressive darkness around him, and then, a profound, agonizing realization. He was directly beneath the immense stone slab, its cold, unyielding mass now filling his entire world, poised to complete its terrible arc, and in that horrifying, suspended moment, he felt a strange, detached sensation, as if his spirit were already separating from his body, rising above the impending impact, watching, witnessing, as the shadow of the colossal pendulum consumed him entirely. The smell of old blood, the taste of ashes, the crushing cold, the sound of the thump-thump, all fused into a single, overwhelming sensory explosion that detonated in his mind, and then, with a final, earth-shattering crunch that reverberated through the very foundations of Blackwood Keep, a sound that was both deafening and strangely silent, for it marked the complete and utter cessation of Elias's physical existence. The monumental pendulum completed its swing, striking its hidden indentation with a force that seemed to shake the very fabric of reality, and in that instantaneous, terrible moment, Elias, the humble scribe, vanished, his body instantly consumed by the monstrous machine, his life force, his very essence, ripped from him, pulled into the pulsing heart of the keep, feeding the glowing, spiraling symbols on the pendulum, empowering the ancient darkness that Lady Eleanor had spoken of, becoming one with the countless forgotten souls whose last desperate pleas were etched into the stone, an anonymous part of the grim, rhythmic cycle that ensured the monstrous pendulum would continue its endless, horrifying swing for centuries more. The air in the chamber, for a single, fleeting heartbeat, seemed to hold its breath, a profound, unsettling stillness immediately following the monstrous crunch, before the rhythmic thump-thump, thump-thump of the pendulum resumed its unfeeling beat, now imbued with a renewed, subtly amplified power, a deeper resonance that vibrated through the vast, subterranean hall, a sound that seemed to hum with a grim satisfaction. A terrible contentment that spoke of a hunger momentarily sated. Master Alaric, his grip no longer holding Elias, his skeletal hand now empty, stood perfectly still, his bent form receding slightly into the deeper shadows, his vacant, knowing eyes, unseen in the darkness, fixed on the now active basin, as if overseeing the absorption of the new sustenance. Lady Eleanor, her presence still radiating ancient, chilling authority, remained equally motionless, a silent, grim deity whose watchful gaze seemed to linger on the very spot where Elias had just been, her dark robes rustling with that dry, brittle sound, as if acknowledging the successful completion of the ritual, the successful continuation of the cycle. The metallic, cloying smell of blood in the chamber, rather than fading, seemed to deepen, a fresh, potent wave washing over the ancient decay, mingling with the faint, sickly sweet scent of the lingering essence of a soul unbound. A horrifying testament to the immediate, brutal consumption that had just occurred. Elias, the man, was gone, utterly, irrevocably, his physical form reduced to nothing, his story abruptly, horribly ended, yet his essence, his very spark of life, was not simply extinguished. Instead, it was now interwoven into the dark, powerful fabric of Blackwood Keep itself, feeding the glowing symbols, empowering the ancient mechanism, becoming an eternal, silent part of its monstrous, beating heart, a new, desperate whisper added to the chorus of Alexis and Elara, a silent scream echoing through the ages, perpetually fueling the balance that Lady Eleanor so chillingly spoke of, ensuring that the keep, with its unimaginable secrets and its insatiable hunger, would continue its terrible existence, patiently waiting for the next chosen one, the next unwitting soul to be drawn into its depths, forever maintaining the grim, rhythmic swing of the blood-fueled pendulum, a terrifying, eternal cycle from which there was, for those who entered Blackwood Keep, no escape, no reprieve, only an endless, unspeakable absorption into the ancient darkness, and the chilling, undeniable truth that, for Elias, indeed, his very first night in a medieval castle, this dark, terrible fortress, had been his last. Elias has met his terrifying end, becoming one with the blood-fueled machine and the countless souls before him. Blackwood Keep's monstrous cycle continues, with Lady Eleanor and Master Alaric as its chilling custodians. The colossal pendulum, dark and massive, continued its swing, now imbued with a renewed, subtly amplified power that vibrated through the very foundations of Blackwood Keep, a deeper resonance that pulsed through the vast, subterranean hall, a sound that hummed with a grim satisfaction. A terrible contentment that spoke of a hunger momentarily sated, of an ancient, insatiable appetite that had just been appeased, for Elias, the humble scribe, was gone, utterly, irrevocably, his physical form reduced to nothing in that earth-shattering crunch, his life force, his very essence, ripped from him and pulled into the pulsing heart of the keep, feeding the glowing, spiraling symbols etched into the pendulum, empowering the ancient darkness that Lady Eleanor had spoken of, becoming one with the countless forgotten souls whose last desperate pleas were carved into the stone, another, anonymous part of the grim, rhythmic cycle that ensured the monstrous pendulum would continue its endless, horrifying swing for centuries more. The air in the chamber, for a single, fleeting heartbeat, held its breath, a profound, unsettling stillness immediately following the monstrous crunch, a silence that lasted only a moment before the rhythmic thump-thump, thump-thump resumed its unfeeling beat. But now it was different, deeper, more confident, a sound that felt stronger, more vibrant, as if the machine itself had just been refreshed. Its ancient gears newly oiled with the very lifeblood that had just been offered, and this subtle change in rhythm, this renewed energy, was itself a chilling testament to the brutal consumption that had just occurred. Master Alaric, his grip no longer holding Elias, his skeletal hand now empty, stood perfectly still, his bent form receding slightly, almost merging, into the deeper shadows at the edge of the now extinguished lantern's fallen light, his vacant, knowing eyes, unseen in the profound darkness, fixed with an unwavering, unblinking intensity on the blood-stained basin, as if overseeing the complete absorption of the new sustenance, ensuring that not a single drop of Elias's essence was wasted, that every last spark of his life was drawn into the hungry heart of the keep, and in his motionless vigil, he seemed less like a man and more like an extension of the castle itself, an ancient, withered guardian eternally bound to its terrible purpose, an unfeeling cog in a monstrous, cosmic machine. Lady Eleanor, her presence still radiating that ancient, chilling authority, that power that seemed to drain all hope and warmth from the very air, remained equally motionless, a silent, grim deity whose watchful gaze seemed to linger on the very spot where Elias had just been, her dark robes rustling with that dry, brittle sound, not of cloth but of ancient parchment, of desiccated leaves, of brittle bones. As if acknowledging the successful completion of the ritual, the successful continuation of the cycle, and in her stillness she exuded a terrible, profound calm, a sense of having witnessed this countless times before, an ageless weariness mixed with an unwavering determination to fulfill her grim duty. Her pale, almost translucent face, framed by the deep shadows of her hood, showed no emotion, no triumph, no regret, only that same piercing, icy intelligence in her deep-set, ancient eyes, eyes that held the weight of centuries, the terrible burden of countless sacrifices, the full, horrifying knowledge of the balance she maintained, a balance that demanded endless suffering and death to prevent an even greater, unnameable darkness from consuming all. The metallic, cloying smell of blood in the chamber, rather than fading into the background, seemed to deepen, a fresh, potent wave washing over the ancient decay, mingling with the faint, sickly sweet scent of the lingering essence of a soul unbound. A horrifying testament to the immediate, brutal consumption that had just occurred, a thick, suffocating stench that seemed to fill every corner of the vast cavern, permeating the very stone, making the air heavy and hard to breathe, a constant, sickening reminder of the ultimate price paid to keep the keep's monstrous heart beating. Elias, the man, was gone, utterly, irrevocably, his physical form reduced to nothing, his story abruptly, horribly ended, yet his essence, his very spark of life, was not simply extinguished, not just vanished into oblivion. Instead, it was now interwoven into the dark, powerful fabric of Blackwood Keep itself, feeding the glowing symbols on the pendulum, empowering the ancient mechanism, becoming an eternal, silent part of its monstrous, beating heart, a new, desperate whisper added to the chorus of Alexis and Elara, a silent scream echoing through the ages, perpetually fueling the balance that Lady Eleanor so chillingly spoke of, ensuring that the keep, with its unimaginable secrets and its insatiable hunger, would continue its terrible existence, patiently waiting for the next chosen one, the next unwitting soul to be drawn into its depths, forever maintaining the grim, rhythmic swing of the blood-fueled pendulum. The silence that followed the immediate impact, once the new thump-thump had settled into its steady, powerful rhythm, was even more profound than before, a deep, heavy quiet that seemed to solidify around Lady Eleanor and Alaric, a quiet that was not empty but rather filled with the lingering echo of Elias's vanished presence, a new, subtle resonance within the very stones that spoke of a fresh addition to the keep's dark energy. It was a silence that held the weight of accumulated agony, of countless lives absorbed, a silence that hummed with a barely perceptible, chilling power, the concentrated essence of centuries of sacrifice, and in this heightened quiet, an almost imperceptible shift occurred within the chamber. The faint, sickly glow of the spiraling symbols on the colossal pendulum seemed to brighten, just for a moment, with a deeper, more vibrant hue, a pulse of malevolent energy that rippled through the ancient stone, making the very air around it feel charged, heavy with an unseen force, and then it settled back into its usual faint, hypnotic shimmer. But Elias, the former scribe, was now intrinsically part of that shimmer, a new, silent voice within the chorus of the lost. Lady Eleanor slowly, almost imperceptibly, turned her head, her ancient eyes sweeping across the vast cavern, not looking for anything specific, but rather seeming to feel the change, to gauge the new vitality, the fresh infusion of power that now coursed through the veins of Blackwood Keep. A faint, almost ghost-like smile, a barely there upturning of her bloodless lips, touched her face, a fleeting expression of grim satisfaction that quickly vanished, replaced by her usual mask of ancient weariness, a subtle movement that spoke volumes about her connection to the machine, her understanding of its deepest needs. Alaric, beside her, remained perfectly still, a silent guardian, his role complete for now, his gaze still fixed on the basin, as if waiting for a final, unseen sign that the transfer was complete, that the last vestiges of Elias's humanity had been fully drawn into the keep's hungry maw, and indeed, a faint, almost invisible wisp of what appeared to be silvery mist, barely discernible in the absolute darkness, seemed to rise from the now dry basin, swirling upwards towards the pendulum, dissipating into the glowing symbols, a final, ethereal farewell to a life stolen, a soul absorbed. As the last tendrils of the silvery mist vanished, a subtle tremor ran through the vast chamber, not a violent shake, but a deep, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the very core of the earth beneath them, a soft, powerful vibration that spoke of ancient energy stirred, of a profound shift in the cosmic balance that Lady Eleanor had so chillingly articulated. The thump-thump of the pendulum, though outwardly unchanged, now carried a deeper, more profound bass note, a resonant echo that spoke of heightened power, of a strengthened purpose, as if the consumption of Elias had pushed the machine to a new, more potent state of being. Lady Eleanor, her head now slightly inclined, as if listening to a silent symphony that only she could hear, seemed to nod almost imperceptibly, a gesture of profound, ancient understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the successful perpetuation of a cycle that transcended human morality, that existed on a plane beyond good and evil, a cycle that simply was. The cold in the chamber, which had been so pervasive and bone-chilling, now seemed to possess a new quality, not just an absence of warmth, but an active, almost living chill, a cold that felt like it was absorbing all energy, all light, all life, a cold that was a direct manifestation of the keep's newly refreshed power, its insatiable hunger briefly sated but always lingering, always waiting for the next. Alaric finally shifted, a slow, deliberate movement that broke his frozen vigil, and he turned, his bent form facing the dark, winding stairway from which Elias had descended, his vacant eyes, still unseen, seemingly gazing into the very path of egress, as if anticipating the next arrival, the next unwitting soul to be drawn into the depths of Blackwood Keep. Lady Eleanor, her silent understanding complete, also turned, her dark robes rustling with that dry, brittle sound, and together, with an unnerving, synchronized grace, they moved slowly, deliberately, towards a deeper, darker part of the cavern, towards an archway Elias had not noticed before, an opening almost entirely swallowed by the shadows between two colossal pillars. An archway that seemed to lead into an even more profound and ancient darkness, a deeper secret within Blackwood Keep's heart, a place from which even the booming thump-thump of the pendulum seemed to grow muffled, distant, absorbed by the immense, crushing silence that radiated from that untouched, unseen realm. As they vanished into the absolute blackness of that new, unexplored passage, their forms slowly dissolving into the gloom, Elias, or rather, the lingering, ethereal fragment of his consciousness, now irrevocably bound to the keep's dark essence, felt a final, chilling wave of realization wash over him, a terrifying understanding that the sacrifice was not simply about feeding the machine, not merely about maintaining a balance, but about something far grander, far more sinister, a deeper, unending purpose that stretched beyond the confines of the castle, extending its tendrils into the very fabric of existence, manipulating lives, orchestrating fates, ensuring that the ancient power of Blackwood Keep would not only survive but would subtly, relentlessly, continue to grow, patiently awaiting the time when its insatiable hunger would once again demand its due, and a new, unwitting soul would step through its gates, drawn by an irresistible, deadly fascination, only to become another silent, eternal whisper within the cold, beating heart of the monstrous keep, eternally fueling its dark, unending story. As Lady Eleanor and Master Alaric, their forms slowly dissolving into the gloom, vanished into the absolute blackness of that new, unexplored passage, leaving behind the cavern where Elias had met his gruesome end, the lingering, ethereal fragment of Elias's consciousness, now irrevocably bound to the keep's dark essence, felt a final, chilling wave of realization wash over him, a terrifying understanding that the sacrifice was not simply about feeding the machine, not merely about maintaining a balance, but about something far grander, far more sinister, a deeper, unending purpose that stretched beyond the confines of the castle, extending its tendrils into the very fabric of existence, manipulating lives, orchestrating fates, ensuring that the ancient power of Blackwood Keep would not only survive but would subtly, relentlessly, continue to grow, patiently awaiting the time when its insatiable hunger would once again demand its due, and a new, unwitting soul would step through its gates, drawn by an irresistible, deadly fascination, only to become another silent, eternal whisper within the cold, beating heart of the monstrous keep, eternally fueling its dark, unending story. And now, that fragmented awareness of Elias, a ghost within the machine, found itself drawn, irresistibly, through the very stones, following the departing figures of Lady Eleanor and Alaric into the profound, untouched darkness of the archway, a place that radiated an even older, more primal chill, a cold that spoke not of an absence of warmth, but of an active, consuming void, a silence so deep it felt like the absence of all sound, all thought, all existence itself, a realm untouched by even the booming thump-thump of the pendulum, which now faded into a distant, muffled echo behind them, swallowed by the crushing quiet of this deeper, darker secret. The passage they entered was unlike any Elias had witnessed before in the keep. It was not a carved corridor, nor a constructed stairway, but a raw, natural tunnel, as if the castle had merged with the very mountain, its walls not of hewn stone, but of rough, black rock, slick with a thick, viscous moisture that shone faintly with an unnatural, sickly luminescence in the absolute gloom. A light that seemed to come from within the rock itself, a faint, pulsing, internal glow that cast no shadows. Only an eerie, unsettling illumination that revealed veins of dark, unknown minerals weaving through the rock like frozen lightning. The air here was incredibly heavy, dense, almost difficult to breathe, thick with a profound, earthy smell. But it was not the damp, metallic scent of the upper levels. This was a smell of deep, subterranean depths, of primordial earth, of something ancient and dormant stirring beneath countless layers of time, mingled with a faint, sharp scent like ozone after a lightning strike, and another, more disturbing odor. Subtle yet pervasive, like burning dust, or perhaps, dried, concentrated despair. Lady Eleanor and Master Alaric moved through this primal darkness with an unnerving grace, their figures, now illuminated by the faint, internal glow of the tunnel walls, appearing even more ethereal and less human, as if they were beings fashioned from the shadows and the cold itself. Alaric, his bent form shuffling silently, seemed to glide effortlessly over the uneven, rocky floor, his ancient eyes, though still vacant, possessing a strange, heightened alertness in this profound gloom, as if this was his true element, his natural home, while Lady Eleanor, regal and terrifying, her dark robes flowing around her like a living shadow, walked with a purposeful, unwavering stride, her pale, almost translucent face now radiating a faint, almost imperceptible internal light of its own, a cold, focused energy that seemed to cut through the oppressive darkness, a faint, pulsing aura that spoke of immense, contained power. Elias, or what remained of him, a whisper of consciousness bound to the keep, perceived their passage not through sight, but through a strange, resonant echo within the very stones, a deep, knowing vibration that connected him to their actions, to their intentions, to the ancient secrets they guarded, and he felt a terrifying sense of inevitability, a profound understanding that this deeper realm was the true core, the ultimate source of Blackwood Keep's malevolent power, a place where the rules of the living world held no sway. The tunnel stretched on, seemingly endless, twisting and turning deeper into the earth, and Elias felt the immense, crushing weight of the mountain above them, of the entire castle, pressing down, yet here, in this raw, natural passage, it felt less like a threat and more like a protective embrace, a colossal shell shielding some unimaginable, slumbering force within. Finally, after what felt like an eternity traversing the glowing, coiling depths, the tunnel opened abruptly into an even vaster, more immense cavern, a space so enormous that its ceiling and far walls were completely lost to the absolute darkness, making it feel like they had stepped into the very hollow heart of the earth itself, a boundless void filled with a silence so profound that it was almost deafening. A silence that seemed to precede the very concept of sound. Here, there was no pendulum, no blood-stained basin, no rhythmic thump-thump, only a stillness so ancient and complete that it felt like time itself had paused, waiting, eternally. In the center of this colossal, dark expanse, standing alone on a raised platform of smooth, obsidian-like rock that seemed to absorb all light, was not a machine, but a monolithic structure, vast and ancient, a towering pillar of what appeared to be pure, polished darkness, a substance that seemed to drink in the ambient glow from the tunnel entrance, making it appear as a black hole in the heart of the cavern. It was impossibly tall, its upper reaches vanishing into the unseen ceiling, and its surface, though utterly devoid of reflection, seemed to ripple with a faint, internal shimmer, a subtle, undulating energy that pulsed with a slow, powerful rhythm, not an auditory beat, but a deep, resonant vibration that Elias felt in his newly ethereal being, a pulse that resonated with the very fabric of the keep's power. A pulse that was older, deeper, more fundamental than even the blood machine above. Etched into the base of this colossal black pillar, glowing with the same sickly, unnatural luminescence as the tunnel walls, were the spiraling symbols, the very same labyrinthine marks Elias had seen on the table in his room, the same that adorned the blood-fueled pendulum, but here, they were immense, intricate, covering the entire base of the monolith, forming a vast, complex tapestry of forgotten knowledge. A silent language of cosmic power that seemed to writhe and flow with an ancient, malevolent life, and Elias understood, with a terrifying, undeniable clarity, that this was the true heart of Blackwood Keep, the ultimate source, the primordial engine of its existence, a place where the balance was not merely maintained, but actively woven, ceaselessly, into the very fabric of reality. Lady Eleanor and Master Alaric stopped before the colossal black monolith, their movements synchronized, a silent reverence in their stillness, and Alaric, for the first time since Elias's demise, broke his silence, his voice a low, guttural murmur that barely disturbed the profound stillness of the cavern, yet resonated with an ancient power that filled Elias's ethereal consciousness. A voice that was no longer raspy with age but deep and resonant, a whisper of cosmic knowledge. "The veil thins, my lady," he intoned, his head bowed slightly, his vacant eyes now seeming to hold an unimaginable depth of understanding, an ancient wisdom that transcended mere human thought. "The threads weaken. Another cycle approaches." Lady Eleanor, her gaze fixed on the pulsing, dark monolith, slowly raised both hands, her pale, almost translucent fingers spreading wide, and a faint, silvery light, cold and pure, seemed to emanate from her palms, bathing the surface of the black pillar in a soft, ethereal glow, causing the etched spiraling symbols to surge with a renewed, vibrant intensity, their sickly luminescence transforming into a brilliant, almost blinding, pulse of raw, ancient energy that throbbed in synchronization with the unseen pulse of the monolith itself. Her thin lips parted again, and her voice, now deeply resonant and powerful, filled the vast cavern, echoing off the unseen walls, not a human voice, but a chorus of countless, ancient voices, a symphony of ages, speaking in a language Elias could not comprehend, yet understood with every fiber of his dissolved being, a language of power, of creation, of unmaking. "The loom of shadows demands strength," she proclaimed, her voice vibrating with an immense, terrifying authority, a power that Elias now recognized as not merely human, but cosmic. "The threads of reality fray. The great consummation approaches. Our vigil must not waver. The keep is but an anchor, a tether to this plane. The true work lies beyond, in the stitching of the fractured light, in the binding of the encroaching void." As she spoke, the entire cavern seemed to hum with a profound, terrifying energy, the air crackling with unseen forces, and the pulsing light from the monolith intensified, forming intricate patterns of energy that swirled and danced around the vast chamber, extending outwards, beyond the confines of the cavern, beyond the mountain, beyond Blackwood Keep itself, reaching out into the very fabric of the world, into the unseen currents of existence, manipulating, shaping, preparing. Elias, now a dispersed consciousness, an observing fragment woven into the keep's essence, felt a final, terrifying wave of absolute comprehension. The blood machine above, the endless sacrifices, the grim rhythm of the pendulum, they were merely a localized manifestation, a smaller, coarser instrument of a far vaster, more profound ritual. The keep itself was not just a castle, it was a cosmic anchor, a binding point, a nexus of immense, ancient power, and this black monolith, this loom of shadows, was its true engine, a device that consumed not just lives, but forces, weaving them, stitching them, into the very tapestry of reality, preventing some great consummation, some ultimate unraveling of existence, a cosmic horror that transcended human understanding. Lady Eleanor and Alaric were not merely guardians of a local secret, they were wardens of a universal barrier, ancient beings who had long ago shed their humanity, sacrificing their very souls to become instruments of this monumental, terrifying task, tirelessly working to mend the fractured light and bind the encroaching void. Elias's own essence, the raw, vital energy ripped from him by the pendulum, was now, he realized with chilling clarity, being channeled, drawn through unseen conduits, pulled into this loom of shadows, becoming a single, infinitesimal thread in the vast, cosmic tapestry Lady Eleanor was weaving, a tiny stitch in the fabric of reality, a minute contribution to the endless struggle against the great consummation. His stolen life now repurposed, an unwilling, eternal participant in a war he could not even begin to fathom. The profound cold in the cavern was not just an absence of warmth, but the chill of the void itself, the icy breath of the encroaching darkness they fought against, and the oppressive silence was the stillness of a world on the brink, a fragile reality held together by these desperate, ancient rituals. As Lady Eleanor's voice, now a resonant hum, faded into the profound stillness, and the shimmering energy from the monolith continued to pulse and weave, Elias, the last lingering echo of a humble scribe, felt himself slowly, irrevocably, begin to dissolve even further, his fragmented consciousness spreading throughout the keep, becoming one with the stones, with the shadows, with the very power that emanated from the loom of shadows, his individual identity fading, merging into the collective consciousness of the absorbed, a silent, eternal witness to the cosmic horror and the endless, terrifying struggle that unfolded unseen, deep beneath the earth, in the heart of Blackwood Keep, a truth so vast and so terrible that it transcended human comprehension, a truth that proved, with an absolute, terrifying finality, that indeed, no one, not a single soul, could ever truly survive a night within its ancient, malevolent walls, for even in death, one became merely another thread. In its unending, dark, and cosmic story, eternally bound to its terrible purpose, forever fueling the loom of shadows, forever a part of the keep's terrifying, unending existence, eternally consumed and consuming, woven into the fabric of a universe teetering on the edge of an unimaginable abyss.